Sermons are not supposed to have sponsors. But this morning, this sermon has two unofficial sponsors. The first unofficial sponsor is Camp Ramah. Because for the first time in 14 years, Rabbi Guzik and I became empty nesters this summer. Because Camp Ramah took all of our children at once and immersed them in the most beautiful Jewish living that you can imagine. And so because of this opportunity, Rabbi Guzik and I decided to have a little R&R, rest and relaxation, and also a little learning in Italy. We saw beautiful coastlines. We ate a lot of pizza. We kayaked in the Mediterranean. But I had one goal when I went to Italy and Rome, and that was to go inside the Colosseum, not the one where we play football, Trojans or Bruins, but the real one. And so one day in Rome, we decided to book 2 tours to make it a compact day, an hour-and-a-half tour of the Colosseum and an hour-and-a-half tour of the Jewish quarter in Rome. When we arrived at the Colosseum, our tour guide told us, "Welcome to the 3-hour tour. And the first half of the hour and a half of the 3 hours we will spend in the Forum, and the next hour and a half we will go inside the Colosseum." Meaning I went to Italy, I'm back, and I did not go inside the Colosseum. But it was a blessing. Because when you go to the Forum, right next to the Colosseum, you see one of the most famous arches in Jewish history, the Arch of Titus, built in 80 CE, after the Common Era, 10 years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Romans. As you walk by the ruins of the Forum, you immediately see the architectural similarities in places like Masada, in places like the amphitheater in Caesarea, in bathhouses in Jerusalem's Old City, the Cardo. And as you know, if you have been to Rome, and you look above in the Arch of Titus, sculpted inside is a fascinating scene of individuals carrying what? A menorah. 7-branched from the temple in Jerusalem. But ask yourself, who is carrying that menorah? And depending on who you ask, you might get 2 different answers. Because it's up for your eye to decipher. Are they Roman soldiers showing the great defeat of Jerusalem in 70 CE? Or are they Jewish slaves with their shoulders slooped, depicting the shame of our ancestors' exile for thousands of years? The answer depends on how you tell that story. Our tour guide for that first part of the day, he was born in Rome. He lived his entire life in Rome. And yet he explained that there were these people called Romans. He himself was not one. But an hour and a half later, we were not in the Colosseum, but we were in the Jewish quarter of Rome, known as the ghetto. And this unofficial sponsor of this part of the sermon is actually our friends the Hops, who are on the bima this morning. Because at Kander Feldman's Gala, we were sitting with the Hops, and they said, "Rabbis, if you go to Italy and you do not go to the Jewish quarter, you are doing yourself a disservice." And it just happened that the Hops are on the bima this morning. And so we went, and we toured the gorgeous synagogue and learned about the diversity within the Roman Jewish community. And our tour guide there was also from Rome, but she told us something very different from the tour guide just a few miles away in the Arch of Titus, who was from Rome as well. She told us, and she didn't know we were rabbis, she said, "I am Roman. I am a Roman Jew. And we have kept our traditions for thousands of years, up until today." For thousands of years, these Jews in Rome, Roman Jews, have kept those traditions and still have a vibrant Jewish community with wonderful kosher restaurants and a gorgeous Jewish day school. Just miles away from that Arch of Titus in 80 CE, a place where the Jews were meant to be shamed, defaced, and one day not meant to be here in Los Angeles. Tonight we will begin Tisha B'Av, and we will read the book of Eicha from the book of Lamentations. Not only do we commemorate the destruction of the first and second temples, but so many calamities in Jewish history that occurred on Tisha B'Av. And in the second chapter, we will read these three words, Patsu alayich pihem, that your enemies, they jeered at you. When you read the book of Eicha, you realize that each chapter is an acrostic. It's an alphabetical order, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, all the way through Taf. But Rabbi Yochanan points out a problem in the Talmud for this verse where it says your enemies, they jeered at you. It starts with the letter Pei. And if you look at chapter 2, the Ayin and the Pei are reversed. And Rabbi Yochanan says, wait a second, what happened? Why does the Ayin come before the Pei? And he answers, of course, as a rabbi in a roundabout way. He says the answer lies in the story of the spies that we read in the Torah a few weeks ago. He says, what happens when the spies came back and told us what it looked like in the land of Israel? What was their sin? Rabbi Yochanan says, the Pei came before the Ayin. Not the letter, but the Pei, the mouth, came before the eye. In essence, those spies knew what they were going to say before they saw what they were going to see. That which they said was not dependent on what they were going to see, but upon what they already decided to say. The lesson, we must use our eyes before we open our mouths. How we look at that Arch of Titus in Rome can determine how we see the outlook of Jewish history. The Romans parade that menorah through the streets, or did we bring that menorah with us, saying one day we will light that menorah again? And as I searched for that answer, it came in a phone call yesterday to my father. He was a rabbi in Syracuse for 40 years. He now lives in Philadelphia. And I told him what I was going to talk about in the Arch of Titus. And he told me a story that connected dots in a way that I never would have imagined. In our synagogue in Syracuse, New York, we had many, many Holocaust survivors that came through Ellis Island and then made their way to upstate New York. One of them, her name was Erna Rubinstein. She was a survivor of Auschwitz and was liberated with her sisters during a death march in Czechoslovakia. In 1979, that's 3 years before I was born, if you were asking, Erna Rubinstein dedicated a sculpture by the artist Nathan Rappaport, who was also a Holocaust survivor, and it was called The Last March. This sculpture is found in 3 different parts of the world. 1 is where the Warsaw Ghetto uprising occurred, 2 in Yad Vashem, and 3 in Temple Adat Yeshurun in the synagogue that I grew up in Syracuse. The sculpture is eerily similar to the sculpture of the Arch of Titus. But instead of a menorah and Roman soldiers, there are Nazi helmets and old Jews again stooped over, carrying a Torah. And it begged the same question that the Arch of Titus asked us thousands of years ago. Is the Torah being taken away from us, or are we bringing that Torah with us as a sign of collective endurance, a sign of sustaining dignity, even through unimaginable loss? For my entire childhood, as I entered that sanctuary every Shabbat, I walked past the statue of the Last March of Nathan Rappaport. Little did I know that every single time I did with my friends, I was walking in the sanctuary, bringing the vision of Erna Rubinstein and Nathan Rappaport alive, and those Roman Jews that today still say, we are Roman Jews, just a mile and a half from the Arch of Titus, because we were ensuring that one day the letters of Eicha would return to their original place, the Ayin before the Pei, using our eyes before we open our mouths. We were ensuring that our future generation of Jews would not be fooled by fabricated reports, but would be part of a strong narrative of the Jewish spirit and the Jewish soul. Patsu alayich pihem. Today, our enemies still jeer at us. These words, thousands of years ago, said by the prophet Jeremiah, who watched Jerusalem burn, would only have dreamed that we today have members of our congregation, young people from Camp Ramah in Jerusalem, saying these words tonight. These words were in the times of Titus, and these words were said in the times of all the calamities that fell on Tisha B'Av. But we know that these words were never the end of the story, for it is now our turn to carry the mantle of the Torah. It is our turn to light that menorah. It is now our turn to say the words. When we said these words at the end of the Torah service, we put the word Torah back in the ark, and we saw these heroic IDF veterans who literally have put their lives on the line to protect us as Jews around the world. We sang the words that we will end the book of Eicha with tonight. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. God, return us to you. Renew our lives as in days of old. Shabbat Shalom.